Welcome back to our four-part mini-series on the Black Dahlia. Truly one of my favorite old Hollywood cases to talk about. For those of you who don't know, I love old Hollywood. It's not a secret. But yeah, but before I get started, I just want to say a few things. I do have a Patreon that you can join for early access to episodes scheduled to come out. I also have a merch shop for all your true crime gear. Um, Unfortunately, this is audio recording, so um, for any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I hope you all are having a great Memorial Day weekend. Please stay safe and remember that before you go do something stupid, the judge won't be back in town till Tuesday. Um, with that being said, why don't we dive into part two of our mini series? Um, so there was a note that was a black Dahlia note that was sent to the killer. In the graphic nature of the crime and stuff in the letter received by the examiner had resulted in a media circus surrounding her murder. Both local and national publications covered the story heavily, many of which reprinted sensationalized listings, reports suggesting that Short had been tortured for hours before her death. The information, however, was false, and yet police allowed the reports to circulate to conceal Short's actual cause of death, cerebral hemorrhaging from the public. Further reports about her personal life was publicized, including details about allegedly declining Hanson's sexual advances. Additionally, a stripper who was an acquaintance of Short told the police, lied to get you guys worked up over her, but she left him hanging dry. This led to some reporters to look into the possibility that Short was a lesbian and began questioning employees of the patrons of the gay bars in Los Angeles. This claim remained unsubstantiated, and the Herald Express also received several letters from the reported killer. Again, made him cut and paste clippings. One says, "I will give up the Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." On February 1st, the LA Daily News reported the case had run to a stone wall with no leads for investigations to pursue. The Examiner continued to run stories on the murder and the investigation, which led to a front page news for 35 days after discovering the body. When interviewed, lead investigator Captain Jack Donahue told the press that he believed that Short's murder had occurred in a remote building on the shack in the outskirts of LA, and that her body was transported into the city where it was disposed of. Based on the precise cuts in the section of her body, the LAPD looked into the possibility that the murderer had been a surgeon, doctor, or someone with medical knowledge. In the mid 1940s, in 1947, the LAPD served a warrant to the University of Southern California Medical School, located near the site where the body was located, requesting a complete list of the program students. The university agreed as long as students' identities remained private. Background checks were conducted but yielded no results. By the spring of 1947, her murder had become a cold case, with a few leads, and Sergeant Phineas Brown, one of the lead detectives on the case, blamed the press for compromising the investigation through journalists, probing the details of unverified reporting. In September 1949, a grand jury convened to discuss the inadequacies of the LAPD's homicide unit, based on the failure to solve numerous murders, including those of women and children in the previous several years. Short being one of them. In the aftermath of the grand jury, further investigation was down on Short's past, with detectives tracing her movements between Massachusetts, California, and Florida, interviewing people who knew her in Texas and New Orleans. However, the interview yielded with no information about the result. George Hodel will become a suspect, and although he was never formally charged with the crime, he came to authorities' attention after the death in which he was accused by his son, LAPD homicide detective Steve Hodel, of killing Short and committing several murders. Before the Dahlia case, he was suspected but not charged. In the death of his secretary, Ruth Spaulding, he was accused of raping his own daughter, Tamar, but acquitted. Hodel fled the country several times, living in the Philippines between 1950 and 1990. Additionally, Hodel has cited um, his father's training in search and circumstance evidence. In 2003, it was revealed in the note from the 1949 grand jury report that investigators had wiretapped Hodel's home and obtained records of conversation of an unidentified visitor. Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. Now they can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. They thought there might have been something fishy anyway. Now they have figured it out. Killed her? Maybe I did kill my secretary. In 1991, Janice Knowlton, who was 10 years old at the time of Short's murder, claimed that she witnessed the father, George Knowlton, beat Short to death with a claw hammer in the detached garage of the family home in Westminster. She would publish a book called Daddy. It was the Daddy was the Black Dahlia's killer in 1995, claiming her father sexually molested her in a book condemned as trash by Jolene Emerson. Knowlton's stepsister, who stated that she believed it, but it wasn't reality. I know because I lived with my father for 16 years. Additionally, Detective St. John told the Times that Knowlton claims were not consistent with the facts of the case. By 2000, Buzz Williams, a retired detective, along with the Long Beach Police Department, wrote an article for the LBPD newsletter, The Rap Sheet of Short's Murder. His father, Richard F. Williams, and his friend Con Keller were both members of the LAPD's Gangster Squad investigating the case. Williams' father believed that the lifeguard, Captain John Dillard, was the killer, and that the case was, and that when Dylan returned home to his home in the state of Oklahoma, he was able to avoid extradition in California because of his wife, Georgia Stevenson, who was the second cousins with the Illinois governor, Alday Stevenson II, who contacted the governor of Oklahoma on Dylan's behalf. Keller believed that Mark Henson was the killer, and that he studied the surgical school in Sweden and had elaborated on parties attended by prominent LAPD officials. His article also states that Dillon sued the LAPD for $3 million, but that suit was dropped. Harnish disproves this, claiming that the LAPD cleared Dillon after exhausted investigation later that district attorneys filed positively placed San Francisco when Short was killed. His claims also state there was no LAPD cover up and that Dillon had received a financial settlement from the city of Los Angeles, but not produced any concrete evidence to prove this. In 2003, Ralph Alsdale, one of the original detectives of the case, told the Times that he believed that he had identified Short's killer. The man had been seen in a black sedan and parked near a vacant lot where the body was discovered. On the early morning of January 15th, 1947. A neighbor driving by today stopped to dispose of a bag of lawn clippings and saw a lot when he saw a parked sedan, allegedly when it was right near the door. The driver was standing in the lot. His arrival apparently startled the owner of the sedan, who approached him and proceeded to peer at his window before returning to the sedan and driving away. The sedan owner was followed by a local restaurant where he worked, but he was cleared of being suspicion. Now, the 2017 book Black Dahlia Red Rose by Pierre Eatwell focuses on Leslie Dillon, a bellhop who was a former mortician's assistant. His associates Mark Hansen and Jeff Connors, and Sergeant Phoenix Brown, a lead detective who had links to Hansen, allegedly corrupt. Eatwell poses in the short was murdered because she knew too much of the men's involvement in the scheme of robbing hotels. She further suggested that Short was killed at the Astor Motel in Los Angeles, where the owners reported finding their room covered in blood and fecal matter on the morning of Short's body. The examiner stated in 1949 that LAPD Chief Williams of Wharton denied the Astor Motel had anything to do with the case. However, its rival newspaper, the LA Herald, claimed that the murder had occurred. Now, a chilling batch of evidence could revive the unsolved Black Dahlia murder mystery. On January 15, 1947, an aspiring 22-year-old actress was brutally murdered in a vacant lot. Now, after Short was arrested for underage drinking in 1943, she landed in Florida where she met Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., who she reportedly agreed to marry. But tragically, he died in a plane crash in August 1945. Let's talk about what Short's life was like in Hollywood. It's easy to now. Let's think about it for a second. This area was compared to like the Wild West, but for all of its neon signs and towering skyscrapers, in the LA in 1940s was far more removed from the real Wild West. There was figures like Alfego Baca, a famed Western lawman who was still around when Major Jordan's plane crashed, John Reynolds Hugh, a Texas Ranger, who is believed to have inspired the Lone Ranger character, even lived longer than Elizabeth Short, and even some LAPD officers were forced on the force for less than 20 years and might have had a chance to meet Wyatt Earp, an iconic figure of the Wild West. Some of the Wild West spirits still linger in 1940s Los Angeles, and there was a sense of certain authorities that overlooked illegal activities. Influential men used their power for corrupt purposes, and journalists, where they would also look for extra excitement in the stories for the readers. But the kind of heroic cavalry in the Old West were now regulated exclusively to Hollywood and soundstage in the films. Now, how did she exactly die? Well, some say only a surgeon could have killed her. That was an assessment made before her brutally desecrated corpse had even been identified. A surgeon did it, or a doctor, or at the very least, someone who had medical training. This was the only way to explain the sheer precision and perverse mutilation of her corpse. Um, Now, Short face was beyond the mouth cuts and was clearly visible, although the injuries were repeated blows. And although the LAPD of 1940s didn't have the modern tools of DNA testing, police were able to procure fingerprints from the corpse.